The views and opinions expressed in these historical letters that may contain vernacular used in the World War II era, the post-war era, and the Cold War era do not reflect the views and opinions of any of the individuals involved with this project, including, but not limited to, the podcast's creators. Morning, Jamie.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. You have your coffee?
I do have my coffee, and I'm just going to keep using that NIS Atumwa mug, which I'm going to keep bringing that up to the camera. Isn't that neat with the wings and the anchors in little Iowa, right there in the center with the little star where Atumwa is located in the state. So if anybody's wondering, southeast Iowa, the star is marking the spot, like X marks the spot for Atumwa.
I did not know that.
Yep. So just for our little geography lesson about NIS Atumwa, luckily their symbol is going to tell us exactly where they are. It was funny. I was talking to an uncle of mine, and he had served in the Navy, and he was listening to the podcast. He's like, I had no idea that there was a naval base out in Iowa.
Well, of course.
Yeah. And there's also going to be one built in Hutchinson, Kansas as well. NIS Hutchinson is going to be built. That'll come up in some later content as we continue on through World War II. But yeah, just more history, more people being exposed to, I think, just a lot of different pieces of information that probably gets more marginalized, I would say, in the greater histories of the big epic events. It depends on how much you read into these details. Like, there's a lot of World War II scholars that I'm sure they're like, well, yeah, of course there were bases, in these locations. But for the surface level, it's not going to be the first thing mentioned.
Oh, no.
So today, we have 4 letters from Sweetie. 4 letters for episode 11. Now, these letters are a bit shorter, but there's a lot of content packed into these letters. So if you're ready to go, Jamie, we'll get started with this first one from February of 1943.
I am ready. Cue it up.
Atumwa, February 25th, 1943. Dear Jean, I just called Mrs. Langford, and she told me there was a letter from Iowa City for me. But I'd like to write anyway. If necessary, I can write again. Remember you read the last letter I've had from David. It was postmarked either the 11th or 12th of January. Well, I got a letter from David's mother while I had the measles, and she said David had called them the 13th of January to say that he was going by plane from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to Palm Beach, Florida, and from there overseas. Yeah, so David Chase is still in the picture here, despite we don't know what happened to the marriage proposal from January of 1942 that he sent by mail.
So like over a year ago.
These other relationships she's had are these, short-term dates and things that she's been going on, but David's still in contact. And now she's hearing from David Chase's mother about his whereabouts in World War II. So that's fascinating. Also, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to Palm Beach, Florida, and from there overseas. What I'm taking from this is that he's heading either to North Africa or heading to the continental fighting, as opposed to the war in the Pacific. Of course, Fort Bragg, I believe Fort Bragg is still in operation today. I think it was named after Braxton Bragg, which is one of those Civil War generals. Many of these bases were named after Civil War generals. That's just hard to forget the first name. I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody else ever named Braxton. It stands out in my mind, and it's
a cool name.
It's an interesting name. Braxton Bragg was not a very good general. He was a Southern general. He was a Confederate general, but just as regards to ability, he doesn't rank in the top tier of the history books with regards.
Well, he got a fort named after him.
So that's probably one of the best things for him.
Maybe that was his greatest accomplishment.
Yeah. But anyway, so David clearly going overseas.
Yeah.
They had a card from him just after he'd landed at Palm Beach. He said he'd enjoyed the trip down, hadn't been sick. Then on February 1st, he wrote a letter to them that had no postmark, but gave the return address as care of postmaster, New York, New York. He must have gone overseas. About that time, she wrote me little excerpts from his letters, and the card which showed very clearly that he was homesick and worried. I haven't, and I guess they haven't heard any more from him since. She said she'd write if she had, but you know me and my overactive imagination. And I just wanted to mention here really quickly, We'd had those letters from Chester being sent to Bob in the previous episodes, and they were sent care of Postmaster in California. Right. So for the Pacific Theater, we've got the Postmaster in California handling the mail there. And for the Atlantic side of things, we have the care of the Postmaster in New York. And that seems to be the main point of departure, even though they're in places like North Carolina and Miami. Those 2 ships that were sunk early in February carried lots of Army men with them. And I have the most morbid feeling, or premonition, if you like, that David was on one of those 2 ships. I know that next of kin have been notified, but David's mother might not think to write and tell me. I don't believe she knew David thought enough of me to ask me to marry him. I don't think David's thoughtful or careful enough to see that we'd all be worried about him after hearing such news, and if he's interested in something, he might not write to us right away. And on the other hand, if he's been sent to Tunisia, he very likely couldn't possibly write. If only I'd hear from David's mother that she hasn't been notified that he's dead or missing. She's not been any too well. Maybe she couldn't write. I read newspaper stories about the hundreds of men that escaped the sinking ship but were frozen to death before help could come, and I can just almost see him in trouble. Maybe I didn't know how much I thought of him until he gets into trouble, but right now I'd give anything just to know he's all right. Not necessarily see him or hear him, but just know where he is and how he is. Is he getting my letters? Or is he dead? I woke up the other night crying in my sleep. You know, that's unusual since I sleep soundly and don't dream. It does no good to worry, but I can't help it. I do it anyway.
Well, Allison.
There's a lot.
I feel so bad for her.
Mm-hmm.
But not really that bad, because she's like, I just want to know he's alive. I don't need to see him or hear him or have a conversation with. I just need to know he's okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, so obviously she does care about him, and like to hear about this, you know, it does make her worry. And it's also it's an insight into what I'm sure a lot of American women too, like American women, like were worried about their fiancés, their brothers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being on this, and that's just really scary. And then and then too, living in such an age where they only get little pieces of information.
And then I was looking at just the aspect of they're not even over there yet. Whatever happened with these 2 ships, the destination was just never reached. So it made me go look online just to sort of see, you know, what was going on with ships going down. Now, one of the major concerns were U-boats, right? Were the submarine attacks and sinking ships and things like that. But I was legitimately shocked just to see how many ships, and there are logs of ships from all different sides of the war that are going down day by day in early 1943. Because I figured, let me go look to see which 2 ships went down that she's referencing. Mm-hmm. There's 1 or 2 ships going down daily in February of 1943. Now we can isolate that out and take out the ships that are sinking in the Pacific. Some of it's cargo, you know, things like that. Some of it's just there's an issue on the ship. Some of it seems to be based on attacks going on. But I couldn't pinpoint exactly, at least not yet. I'm still researching it, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly which ones are being referenced here, because there's multiple days in February where I think I saw that there were at least 2 ships that were American ships that were sunk or went down in some regard in the Atlantic. So it's hard to tell. Now, she's saying that unfortunately some men froze to death, so I'm thinking it's the North Atlantic. But then again, it's February, so it could really be at any point, depending on, you know, which route's being traveled. So this is something that I hadn't really thought about too much. You know, we talk about casualties, we're thinking about battlefield casualties, we're thinking about disease when the men are in their destination. In this case, there's a lot of casualties going on and they haven't even gotten to the destination yet. And it made me think about that old World War I song. The most famous song coming out of World War I, it has to be, which is Over There. You know, the Yanks are coming. I don't know if you've ever heard about that song from World War I. But it was very, very well known. If you go to the World War I Museum in Kansas City today, it's actually, they have the Over There Cafe, and they've got the lyrics all over the place. But it's saying, like, the Yanks are coming and we won't go home till it's over there. That's the last line of the song. In this case, they didn't get over there.
No. And
I was shocked to see just the frequency. So when Chester, I think he had been mentioning, he was concerned about the German U-boats. You know, we're so far removed from World War II now and our travel is so much faster. We can fly people to a destination within a day, that it was out of my mindset thinking just the threat potentially to human life just in getting to the destination. Now we're talking about days at sea, shipping men literally by ship to go across the Atlantic, to go across the Pacific, to go to their destinations. And it just hadn't dawned on me just how frequently. And plus, we hear about a lot of ships that sink. We hear about very famous ships that sink. We all think the Titanic.
Yeah.
We've heard about like the Lusitania. And
I think of like the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's that kind of stuff, like more like you don't think about. And two, like this wouldn't happen today. I'm sure that the aircraft carriers that they have now.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of the ships. And then
yeah.
And then they're also escorted.
Right.
Like, you have more. So they were probably just whatever they had, they were like sending over there. Mm-hmm. I wonder what some of the ships were. Like that would be something that we could.
The big World War II destroyers, that are going through. But there's also all of these just cargo vessels that are going across. The steamers are still in operation at this time. The big steamships are still moving. So you imagine all of this traffic on the Atlantic Ocean, on these waterways, all the traffic on the Pacific Ocean. And I guess just in my mind, I hadn't really thought about the frequency of casualties going on at sea on a daily basis. And when I looked at, just in the course of trying to find information about these two ships that Sweetie's writing about, I was just taken aback by, oh my gosh, the frequency. It was somewhere around one log I was looking at online, from all different sides. There would be one day and there were just 8 ships that sunk. There were multiple men killed in some of them. Sometimes nobody was killed. Sometimes the ship just sunk. And this is coming from different sides of the war. So there's like a German, vessel that goes down. There's a Soviet vessel that sunk. Or then there's like an American vessel in the Pacific, or there's a British vessel. So it's just like you see all of this going on. And I was just like, it's continuous. Because I thought I was looking at the month, actually. When I was like, okay, well, there were like 8. And it was a day. And then I started scrolling, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And I think this is something we don't really talk about too much, mostly because we know sort of the bigger stories. In World War II, Dunkirk, right? We think of that's also. I don't know if you watched the Dunkirk movie by Christopher Nolan. Oh, that's worth watching. Yeah, about the amazing evacuation off the beaches of France during World War II by the British, by the common fishermen and all the people going across the channel to rescue the soldiers off the beach. That's definitely worth watching. But these are the famous stories we hear about. We don't hear about, this is just how frequently this was going on. And it really, as a historian, it took me aback, just the frequency, by just trying to look for these two.
Yeah, this is definitely, it's a definite change from that time period to this time period. Yeah. This is not something I would have ever thought, oh, there's boats going down all the time. Yep. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
I called to ask train fare, etc. to Chicago. I could leave here at 3:49 to get to Chicago at 8:30. It would cost $6.78 one way. I had to use 3 days of my week's vacation for measles, so that leaves me a short time. I can't ask for time off and still stay in the commander's good graces. This is war, Are you going to get to go? You should come here and we'd get on the Zephyr with Mom and all go together. Right, will you? Love, Sweetie.
Yep, there's a war going on.
Yep. Also, the train fare one way is now $6.78.
That's amazing. Well, yeah. Chester did say that, the trains are being taken up by the soldiers returning home and people going places. So I can imagine they need to make up their money.
Yep. She's short on PTO. She was sick, so sick days are in holidays all in the same group there.
She had the measles.
Yeah.
Which is nowadays has been pretty much eradicated. Measles is, if there is an outbreak, it's usually a vaccine-related outbreak. Mm-hmm. It's related to somebody who developed measles from getting the vaccine and then passing that on. So you don't see this very often. But this was definitely more prevalent.
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of childhood diseases still very prevalent back then. I still think about polio from like the early 20th century. That's basically, if not altogether eradicated, unheard of. There's a lot of like paralysis related diseases that occurred, especially in the younger groups that we don't really hear about anymore. This makes me think about in David McCullough's lectures, and I keep going back to it. And
No, you can. That's okay. He's awesome.
I keep hoping, and I got to meet him before he died, but he's just such a personable historian, and they're so accessible. If you go on YouTube, you can type in David McCullough lecture and just listen to anything you want to listen to. But he was reflecting back, especially in the last 10 years or so before he passed away, he was reflecting back on what's going to be the thing in the 20th century and in the current generation that the historians 100 years from now, 200 years ago, or 200 years from now are really looking at. And he said, of course there's wars and there's everything else. We've always looked at that. He said the number one thing in the 20th century, it's going to be advances in medicine. And he mentioned specifically about how some of these childhood issues and diseases that were so prevalent are just basically gone, just what we just talked about. And the heroes of the advances in medicine, he said he'd like to see, that's what he'd like to see, more like statues and more memorials too, or like these great, individuals that found the way to eradicate things that were so devastating just not too long ago. She's talking about the measles as a 20-year-old. And how many 20-year-olds do we talk to on any given day? It's like, oh yeah, I had to take 3 days off for the measles. I've never heard it.
No, and this is, you think about, measles and and like the vaccine, you required when you go to college to get the vaccine. I had to get the vaccine when I was going to college back in, the early 2000s. And so, but also what we were talking, I've been researching more about like vaccines and these diseases. Measles, the reason that it's so nerve-wracking to get is because it will destroy your immune system. It does take and basically put everything back to zero. So that was the major concern with like getting it, because then you're very susceptible to diseases afterwards. If you get measles when you're younger, it's very mild. Children, the younger you are with measles, the better you're going to come away from it. And so it's actually very curious to me, because they say cancer rates have risen, over the years.
Right.
And one of the theories being floated around was that getting measles and getting your immune system wiped out, whatever, however you want to say it, actually can help your body fight cancers later on in life. There was a woman who was going through cancer treatment, and her doctor was trying everything, and he inoculated her with measles.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's when I hear her kind of flippantly talk about it, it's because it wasn't such a big deal. And you would try to get it younger, obviously, so that you recover from it faster. Getting it older, then your immune system's wiped out. That's not a good thing.
Right.
So being younger, let's say you're a baby, you get the measles, and if you're still breastfeeding, you're getting that immunity from your mother. So it's a very interesting to hear her bring it up in kind of such a casual way, and the way that we view it now. It's just an interesting topic. I'm really curious to see, especially to hear Dr. McCullough say, yes, this is actually like the exploration into medicine. It would be interesting to see, like, in the next 100 years. I hope we're still around. You never know.
Right. The positive things can be seen is because when we take a step back, we have all these conflicts going on. Obviously, World War II, World War I, still going to be huge in the history books. But they're looking at it, and what he was saying was, this is the triumph, is modern medicine. And that continues, the things that we're able to do today that we weren't able to do a generation ago. And then, of course, I think the other thing he was really interested in was flight, because he wrote the book on the Wright brothers, and flight and transportation communications. I think all the advances in technology, all the advances in medicine. But I mean, even as a historian going back to like the 1700s, we don't hear about smallpox. We know that wiped out tons of people. Unfortunately, it eradicated tons of the indigenous peoples, right? Because they had no immunity, and it was just brought over and just spread like wildfire. But we don't hear about, smallpox. We barely hear about polio these days. That's just from the beginning of the 1900s, when that was really a huge issue. We heard a lot about the Spanish flu from the World War I days, especially in contrast to COVID. Basically, they always got compared. So then all of a sudden, everybody's looking back at the Spanish flu from 1917, 1918.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, in H1N1 that we had the epidemic not too very long ago was actually back in the 1900s. There was an H1N1 epidemic in the United States, and that's why it was such a big deal to get out a vaccine for it, to get the flu vaccine out for it, because
Yeah.
it did actually. What was interesting about it was the first H1N1 epidemic did not kill older or younger people. It was
Mhm.
middle-aged men that were
Yeah.
suffering the most from that disease, which I'm guessing that's, they were also probably the ones who were outside of the home the most,
Mm.
and had the most exposure, had points of exposure. But that, yeah. So it is kind of amazing where we've come, but we've also come to a place where we're seeing more cancers.
Yeah.
AIDS was crazy. It was like an epidemic, and now it's
The
become
early
something that is.
1990s, everything that we saw with the HIV
Mhm.
stories that were circulating all through the media. I mean, that was the biggest story. That, and I think the most terrifying to me when I was in school was just learning about Ebola. That was another one that I haven't heard about too recently. About the same time as I think it was like the early 90s, the mid 90s, when I was in middle school and high school, there was a lot of conversations about HIV/AIDS and about Ebola in other countries, and just how devastating these were. Yeah, I think David McCullough is right. The triumph of modern medicine over the course, like we're going to hear about in these letters, there's going to be stories of, unfortunately, kids that are dealing with paralysis or related things. And I don't hear about them. I'm sure things happen, but we don't hear about them with such frequency these days. And that's to the credit to all the good doctors and the scientists over the course of the last 150 years that have worked very hard to advance modern medicine to the point at this point today that we don't have to hear about this going on. So yeah.
Yes, well,
I think Chester would like this section, being a doctor, and Laura being a nurse, and Jean in nursing school. I think
yeah.
yeah, we really did a lot back then, and things have changed. I'm sure Chester would have loved to see where we are now
Oh, I'm
versus
sure he would have.
what he was looking at.
But so we have another letter now,
From
and we're not
February.
sure where this is from.
We're
We're
not
like,
sure when exactly. Yeah. This is from February of 1943. A few of the letters are not dated, but from the content of the letters, we can kind of tell the approximate date range. So the next two letters, actually, we're going to look at. What I'm suspecting is that the first one we're going to listen to here is from the end of February of 1943, and I think everybody's going to understand why I think this is after the letter on February 25th that we just listened to. And then
yes.
the one that's going to follow, that's going to be from March of 1943 and seems to be in succession from that. So we'll start with this one that we suspect is from the end of February 1943. February 1943. Dear Jean, I have not yet heard from David's mother. I can't make up my mind just why she refuses to write to me. The first and only letter I had from her was merely a must answer. It had a full business-like inside address with a salutation that read, Dear Miss Demery, very precise, as though she were holding me at arm's length. I answered that letter as a matter of courtesy. She never answered then when those ships went down. I wrote to her again, and still I've never heard. I think she's being awfully unfair. And I don't like her for it either. This is why I think it's after the February 25th letter, is because it's referencing the ships again that have already been, she already wrote to Jean about that. Sorry, sweetie, but I would hold you at arm's length a bit too if you weren't going to respond to a marriage proposal and you're the mother. So
I'm pretty sure that David said something to his mom.
Yeah.
And was like, well, I did write her, and then she never answered me, and then it took her a long time. And she was like,
Yep. Nope.
So, and the fact that sweetie,
Yeah.
sweetie, you know why.
She brought this on herself. I really believe that.
That was kind of rude. I'm just going to put it out there.
Yep. I got to go home a week ago last Saturday. I got all cleaned up and got to the depot to find the train 2 hours late. I bought a Reader's Digest and a little pocketbook mystery, and I read until it came. I found the folks both stewing over the possibility of missing an OB case while they went away from the office. We got home and visited for a while and finally got to bed. Marge and Bill and the kids came the next day at about 11 o'clock. M.A. is such a nice girl. She knows all the popular songs much better than I do. Worse luck. I didn't get very far with Chris again. For being attendant at his birth, and he doesn't take to me very well. M.A. wanted to stay. She thought I was going to stay. It's a good thing she didn't, though. They left at about 4, and just after they'd gone, a call came for Daddy that would necessitate his taking a patient to Des Moines. While he was at the office making plans, a lady came to the house to say that her daughter was going to have her baby pretty soon as labor pains had begun. Daddy issued directions and sent the patient to Des Moines with her family, and I dumped my stuff back into the suitcase and we started out to the OB case on the way to Sheraton. All right, so I'm going to pause here before we get into the story about the trains that's about to come up here. But just for our audience that may not have listened to some of the earlier episodes, when we're talking about Marge and Bill, Marge is actually Margaret, Sweetie's sister, that they commonly call sister in other letters. So if you hear that in future letters, Margaret. Lizzie, she's called, her name is fully Margaret Elizabeth Demery Bolton at this point because she's married to Bill. Bill is William Bolton. So if you hear Lizzie, sister, or Marge or Margaret referenced, it's all the same person. And then
it's all the oldest. It's all firstborn.
Yep.
Right.
It's the eldest sister. Right. Yep. She's the oldest of the siblings. And then Chris is her son. So Chris is a child. And then MA is her daughter. So this is all the Bolton family, we can say, is Margaret Elizabeth, Bill Bolton, or William Bolton, MA, and Chris. So, and it's interesting, she gives this little piece that, you know, she was there when Chris was born.
Yeah, she attended. So she was probably helping out her dad.
I'm suspecting, yeah, that Chris was delivered by Chester. We got there at about 5 or a little after, and I went in with the folks and chatted and played with the kids, talked with the folks, etc., until about 8:30 when Dad decided that it would be safe for them to leave long enough to take me to the 9:26 train. We got there to find it would get there at 1 o'clock. While the folks hurried back, and I sat down to read and gripe. At about 11, another of the girls who works at the base came in and sat down, and together we griped. Well, when 1 o'clock finally rolled around and I'd begun to gather up my stuff, the man said it would be at least 2:30 before the train got there. Everybody all over the depot groaned, one big groan. It was almost impossible to sleep, and I'd read until I was nearly blind, so I just sat and wished and thought and reminisced until 2:30. Then we all gathered up our belongings, woke each other up only to learn it would be 3:15 before it got there, another 45 minutes. Well, that happened again and again. And believe it or not, the train got into Sheraton at 4 o'clock and left at about 4:20. We got into Ottumwa at 6 o'clock, and I had a headache that had split my head from here to here. Well, I stayed home the next day and slept. Ooh, that's a lot.
That makes me tired.
Right.
Like, I'm tired now.
Mm-hmm.
So she got to there like around 9, I'm guessing 9:26 in the morning.
I think this is actually the evening because they said, yeah, we've got, and I was trying to piece that together, just like, is this a whole day? I think this is at night because the Boltons left at 4. So I'm guessing they left at 4 p.m. And then they went at 5 p.m. for the OB case to check in on the way to Sheraton. So I'm thinking this is at like a 9:30 train that's supposed to get in late at night to Ottumwa.
And she wanted to sleep, and she said she couldn't. Oh, geez. Yeah. She was at the train station.
Even worse. Yeah. She was there all night long. I mean, we're talking 9:26 to 4:20 trains. So that's a 7-hour waiting for the train from Sheraton to Ottumwa. And then they don't arrive in Ottumwa until 6 o'clock. So you can tell the distance between Sheraton and Ottumwa. On a drive today, this is probably no more, I would think, in traffic, like an hour and a half. So this is taking 8 hours overnight. You can't really just say, oh, I'm just going to, curl up on the bench with the other ladies here for the base and take a nap, because you keep thinking that the train's about to come in. So it's not restful sleep. You're only waking up to find, oh, it's been delayed again,
Oh. Yeah. Like all night long, just
like an hour and a half.
It'll be here at 2, now 3, now 4.
We're calling Uber at 10 o'clock. That's it. Done.
That's crazy. But I mean, that's something that they got into. I mean, they were talking about train movement and the soldiers taking over the trains. So Lord only knows what kept it. But yeah. Oh, goodness, that poor thing. So she just stayed home the next day. She's like, I took me all night to get here.
Yeah, how can you be productive at work when, or at least, especially if you have lack of focus, the quality of your work. It might be that you can kind of, I think we've all had that day. Like, I'm drinking my coffee now. I'm not having that day right now, but I'm sort of blearily be a little tired. We've had too late a night the previous night, but we're making it through the day. But this is wartime. What if something that you do accidentally because you're not 100% focused on what you're doing because you're so tired affects a life and death situation from where people are supposed to be moving or whatever she's working on. So, yeah, I feel bad for this 8-hour delay to get at like an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
unheard of.
yeah.
Yeah.
On a train. Oh, goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Poor thing. At least she had some company.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're all griping together.
Yes.
So. I haven't done anything since but stay home. I've gone in for embroidering in a big way. I've done all but hems and French knots on 2 dresser scarves, and I'm working on a luncheon cloth and napkins. I'm going to do some dish towels with little figures of some kind on them, so if David does come home, I'll at least have a start on a hope chest. Some of it's mighty purty, too, if I do say so. Yeah. She's really expecting David to show up.
Mm-hmm. And she's making a hope chest. Isn't that something that, like, if you're going to get married, you start a hope chest? Or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds more serious than the lack of acknowledgement of the marriage proposal that seemed to go on the year before. So something's happened in the background here where she's reconnecting a bit with David Chase.
I don't know. Like, I feel like she's keeping him in her pocket.
Yeah, just like the reserve. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like that. He's the backup.
Yeah, he's the backup.
Sorry, David.
Yeah. I went last night to see Arabian Nights. It wasn't much good. I'd have stayed home tonight, but Lucille called and said she'd like to go to a show. We are going to see Casablanca. From what I hear, it must be good. I want to see Journey for Margaret and Yankee Doodle Dandy, and then I'll stop for a while. And we have to stop here and acknowledge that she's going to see Casablanca.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the top 100 films on so many film lists to see. She mentions a lot of films over the course of these letters. Casablanca is a major one. And, you know, the other thing with Casablanca, and I remember I worked at Blockbuster years and years ago. I loved working at Blockbuster. It might have ended a bit ingloriously, going through bankruptcy and then closing, you know, its doors. And I think there's still like one random store in Alaska.
Did you watch the documentary?
I did. You know,
the documentary. I'm just gonna put it out there that people should watch it, especially like Gen Xers and older millennials. You should definitely watch that. It was it was a blast from the past.
Yeah,
but go on. Yeah, so she's seeing Casablanca.
Yeah.
She's seeing it in the theater.
And Casablanca, I remembered when I was working at Blockbuster, we had one of our employees who was really big into film history. He was actually taking a lot of film education classes. And I remember, I think it was he who mentioned that Casablanca is one of the rare films that is about it was filmed during the time of the thing that it's about. Which is highly unusual. So there's a lot of like World War II propaganda films and things like that where there's like recruitment films and all of this. But to have a movie like Casablanca, like a dramatized film that's about World War II, it's set in World War II and released during World War II, that's highly unusual. You rarely have a dramatized film about a wartime released during the height of the wartime itself. And Casablanca is highly unusual because of this. So the fact that this is 1943 and she's watching Casablanca, which is about things going on in World War II, again, one of the very unusual aspects of this film. And it's such a well-remembered film so many years later. You know, we just had to mention this. Now, she mentions a couple others. I've never heard of Journey for Margaret. I've heard of Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Yeah.
But
I have to call attention. I just love how she's like, we're going to go see Casablanca. From what I hear, it must be good.
From what I hear,
like, oh, honey, you don't even know. Oh, it's and especially, and I had no idea that it was like set like that was such a
it's an unusual thing. Yeah, it's an extremely unusual thing, and for it to be remembered so many years later and to have that, you know, it's a very interesting record that it's like that. And just to see it in time, since we're in 1943 right now, it's like, it's current. It's a current film in a current event. It's very, very unusual as a film, and to this day, I mean, if you think, how many films do we know of that are dramatized current events while the event's going on? Right. So
I can't think of one.
Right.
I can think of, you know, like maybe after the fact, but
maybe
also
immediately after, but during, it's a rare thing. So at that level of quality.
Yeah.
Could you go to Dr. O'Brien's and get the prescription for my glasses? I think they should be checked again. I'm going to write to Daddy about having them checked again down here. But in any event, I do need that prescription. I'm going to get some new glasses right away. That is, I am, if you can help, by getting the prescription from Dr. O'Brien. Could you get me some vitamin tablets and please enclose directions for taking some? Well, I think there's still a lot to be decided about the trip to the wedding. I pinned up a dress for Mom and brought it back with me to have it altered. I'll have to wear my dress with the blue in order to save money. Don't decide definitely not to go. Write all you can about Bob coming home. And all, will you?
So...
Yep. She's talking about getting to Frank's wedding.
She's talking about getting to Frank's wedding. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Frank and Maida have made the determination to get married here.
And I like how she's like, all this other stuff, and then she's like, just at the very end of it, well, okay, yeah, there's a wedding. You know, I'm just going to wear something I already have. We'll figure it out. Yeah. This was definitely a lot. There was a lot going on in this letter. We learned about David.
Right.
Kind of, sort of. We kind of got a little bit more in the story with that.
Mm-hmm.
We learned about like how awful the train situation is and how very, very lucky we can just call an Uber.
Mm-hmm.
And then we learned that she wanted to go see Casablanca. Like, this was a lot.
Seeing Casablanca at the in the absolute time of Casablanca. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, and she's still with Lucille, still palling around together.
Yep. So even if they're not living together, they're still in Ottumwa together.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
She still has her friend there.
Yeah. But, so shall we move on to the next letter?
Yep. So we're going to continue with March 1943.
Train rolling, unlike the one that she took from back to Ottumwa.
Yep. March 1943. Dear Jeannie Bug, your letter came yesterday. Correction, it arrived day before yesterday, but since it had 3 cents postage due, it had to lay in the post office, while they sent out a little notice to the effect that they were holding a letter with 3 cents due. I don't know when I paid 3 cents so willingly. David's letters come with postage due quite frequently. I don't mind spending the money for them. It's the delay involved in getting them out of the post office. Mm-hmm.
So David's okay.
Yes.
David didn't die on this ship.
Yep.
Let's just
die on the ship. We're good there. Check. You know, we found.
And I really, she's so funny. Mm-hmm. Like, she's like, well, they were able to send me the note telling me I owed them money, but not the letter. I think I like that. It's funny.
I remember collect calls when we were kids. This is the collect mail, right? So somebody sent you a letter, but they're not going to release it. And we think today it's very easy to forget. Like, oh, it's just 3 cents. Like, why aren't they just forwarding that? 3 cents is a lot back then. Yes, so they have to go, and they're sending out a note to pay the bill to get the collect mail, essentially, at the post office.
But she I guess she has to do that for David a lot, but she doesn't seem to mind.
Yeah, he's overseas. It is what it is. George was quite pleased with the letter. I made the mistake of opening it and rushing in with it before I had read it myself, and then when you said you didn't know what to tell him, I was beginning to wonder what it might be. He brought it in to me and asked me if I'd like to read it. My curiosity got away from me and I did it. It was a nice letter too, and I'm glad you wrote it. He was pleased and made the remark that he'd have to write to you again and put you straight on the interpretation of solid that you seem to have taken. Solid means the top of the deck, on the up and up, pretty much okay or strictly on the beam, groovy or some such. That's probably the way he'll explain it to you. Right now, for some reason unknown to me, I seem to be out of his good graces. He's not talking to me much. Not being any more than civil, I might have hurt his feelings unwittingly, not intentionally, believe me, but it is possible. Well, if he is sore, he should tell me why, or else stop walking on his lower lip. I can't be punished for something I don't know about, can I?
This is funny because sometimes my daughter, she's like 12, I have to ask her what current
the terminology is.
Terms are, you know, like I did ask her, I was like, what's Riz? What's Riz? And she's like, it's like charisma, Mom. And I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. Yeah. That's why I had a daughter. But this is funny. I love how she like, solid is on the up and up, pretty much okay.
Yeah, like we use this all the time, but we can actually kind of timestamp when this term came about. So mid-40s, the term, hey, it's solid. is now new. And you know what? It's also fascinating because it's survived. We still use this. Swells kind of disappeared a little bit, you know, it's not completely gone. Point. Solids remain. Walking on his lower lip.
That's funny.
That's funny. Yeah. That has not survived the test of time, but we should bring it back. That's a good one.
That's a good one. I like that one. I don't know if you ever watched the show Letterkenny. They have a lot of like little sayings and stuff, and they're like, "You better tuck that bottom lip before a bird comes and poops on it."
Never heard of that before. No.
That's funny, but it also takes a while to get there. But walking on your lower lip,
yeah,
I like that one.
I love things that have an action description in them. As a phrase, this is one of them. Also, who is George?
Yeah, George, just another. I'm gonna just say, Sweetie pulls him in.
Yeah,
she doesn't seem to have any problem.
She's digging that pit as she said she was going to, and she's pushing them in and seeing which one's staying.
I'm just gonna assume that's who it is because, and I guess that he probably
wrote to Jean,
and
Jean wrote back. So there's enough of a relationship here where he's writing to the sister.
Maybe George is somebody that she works with.
Maybe, yeah, but she's upset this guy somehow. He's not really talking to her right now.
And see, that's why I think maybe it's somebody she works with because she spent enough time with him to upset him.
Yeah, right? There's at least some time, enough time to both upset him and for him to have been building up a correspondence with Jean. So that's not just anybody.
Yeah, maybe we'll learn more.
I had a letter written to me specially by our Bob Demery. It was a nice letter. I'll send it to the folks, and maybe they'll send it on to you. I also had a couple of letters from David yesterday. One of them enclosed a badly battered snapshot of him in his civilian days while he was announcing in Burlington. It was good, the best I have of him. Remember, I gave back to him at the time of our tiff the good portraits. This one has been carried around in his pocket. Right rear, he said, and has been sat on for some little time. Brother, it looks it too. But it is a good picture of him. The only others I have are of him in his fatigue clothes, and he looks as tired as the clothes do. He said in one letter that they'd just had mail call, and that he had had 30 letters. 12 of them were mine. How's that for keeping up morale? Just wait till he comes to the time I slumped and didn't write for so long. Phew. Can I just say, other than I'm so happy that Bob wrote, that we're hearing from the front a little bit with her brother Bob. I love that David is specifying which pocket he sat, like this letter was in, that he sat on. I don't know how it's necessary, but just the level of the description of this letter is really crumpled. I guess he had to kind of defend why it was in such bad shape. It's like in my right rear pocket, and I was sitting on a lot, and then I sent it to you with these other letters that she's receiving. There's a huge correspondence going on between her and David at this point.
Oh yeah,
keeping up.
Well, now that he's not proposing and he's across seas,
right? Yeah,
she's got to keep him engaged. Not necessarily really engaged, but you know, that's a play on words. I'm funny.
Yeah.
But I do like that she's like, I got a letter from Bob, but me and Dave were talking so much. He like, he gave me a picture and he got 12 of my letter. You know what I'm saying? Like that's her brother.
Right. Yeah.
Like she's like totally like glossed over the fact that
hey, let me go back to David here. I wonder if David's mother is aware that there's this many letters being sent by Sweetie over to her son. And then the next paragraph after George, like, why isn't George talking to me? But me and David.
Sweetie. I just love her. She's great.
Yeah. It's too good.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that I didn't take George and Betty home with me. I was intending to, and then Mom wrote that she'd not been feeling any too well. Betty's grandfather came up from St. Louis, and so when I found out Mom had been sick, I called the whole thing off. Betty went to St. Louis with her granddad, and I left George here. He felt pretty badly about it, I think, but what could I do? The folks said to bring him any time after 2 weeks is up, they'd be able to entertain him a little better after the OBs are taken care of for a while at least, until a new batch comes on. This war scare. Tack. Well, if we can manage to get back on friendly terms, I'll try to take him in 2 or 3 weeks. That is, if he quits walking on his lips. And just to be really clear here, Betty is Betty Corey. So this is not a relation, like George and Betty are not a unit. So
Okay.
she's talking about Betty Corey because she's so close with the Corey family. It makes sense that she would introduce Betty to her parents. The fact that now George has written to Jean, Jean has written back, and George was invited to come home to Lacona means there could be a little bit of a serious relationship there, but it's still, she's mentioning he's not really talking with her.
Well, she does want to take him.
Yeah.
She does sound like she wants to take him.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that she's like a new batch of pregnancies, you know, because of the war.
Yeah, there's a lot of babies being born here.
A lot of babies. So she's got that is got a little bit more context on George.
Yeah,
that's cool. Good.
Yeah.
I wonder if I wonder what his thoughts are on David. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the middle of this whole thing, there's also this correspondence going with this guy overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you graduate on the 30th, do you? I hope I can come. That's quite a ways off, and it doesn't do any too much good to plan too far in advance, because some of the darndest things do turn up. You'd just be surprised, Mabel. You'd just be surprised. So this is in reference to Jean. Jean is going to graduate from the nursing school that she's in, and Mabel is a nickname of Jean that we don't see frequently that she's using, but just to not confuse anybody, when she's mentioning you'd just be surprised, Mabel, it's an alias for Jean that she's using. But the great thing here is, good job, Jean. She's about to graduate from nursing school.
Yeah.
I haven't written to Maida and Frank for a long time. I wrote to Margaret and Bill after we were there. That time, remember, we walked the last mile and giggled every step of it? I resolved that I will write to Frank and Maida. But I've been trying to write pretty often to David. And I write to the folks before I write to any member of the family. You follow the folks in close second. This letter writing sure does get involved. I guess, though, I should try to get it done. I'll study about that some more. I've been seeing some good shows lately. Tyrone Power and Crash Dive. Please note they really crashed on that one. The Desperados with Randolph Scott, and now Betty Grable and Coney Island, all three in Technicolor. Arlene Bamberg and I are going to go see Coney Island tonight. She's the girl that works for me now. I sure like her a lot. We can pull the best Brooklyn talk you've ever heard. There's a sailor who takes pictures for badges and does the fingerprinting, and he's doing his darndest to teach us to talk double talk. But boy, it's a job, both learning and teaching. We have a lot of fun while we work. It makes the day pass quickly. And I like her. Yeah, we get a little more information about work at the base. I just love she notes here about the films, since we were speaking about Casablanca earlier, all three in Technicolor. There's still a ton of films coming out in black and white, but she's starting to remark that this is really the moment when things are really all shifting into color.
Much better. Well, I don't know if it's much better, but...
Yeah. So you spent some time in Cedar Rapids, did you? Had fun? I always sort of wished that someday I could live in Cedar Rapids. I like the place so well, and I remember that we had so much fun while we were working there that I've always wanted to go back. Our Rindernecks in their new house now. I wish you'd write and tell me about it, enclosing a little drawing or sketch. Draw me a diagram, Moidle. I'm sure I know how you felt about the Lubbock house. Quite like the land of Goshen that Margaret was brought up in, isn't it? What can you expect of the kids, then? Well, I guess I better stop now. I'd like to write to Bob, an incentive to write again. And I should write to Frank and Maida. I've a notion not to write to Margaret and Bill, since they owe me a letter. But I probably will. I'll have to write to David, too, so I guess I'll stop now. Love, Sweetie. So a couple little updates here, just at the end. She talks about how much letter writing she's going to be doing, how much she likes Cedar Rapids. I think we see another alias for Jean there. And that's...
I think she's like, she likes films, she likes to go. And I think that some of these might be lines from movies.
Yeah.
Like, I think she's incorporating some of those little lines, how people do. But yeah, too. And then she's talking about Frank and Maida. Again, so like they keep popping up, but she doesn't really, she touches on these things but doesn't really go into depth.
She doesn't go into depth. And this is something, before we get into this last very small letter we have for today, which this next letter is dated April 5th. It's important to note that in the interim, and it may be why I can say definitively, I've only come across one letter, and that's that March letter that's implied to be in March from 43. I think she did get to the wedding, but Frank and Maida are married on March 15th of 1943. So it's in the background. And it's probably she didn't write which implies to me that Jean probably went as well, because they don't have to write if everybody's there, right? If the whole family's together.
Makes sense.
So, but just to note, congratulations to Frank and Maida. It's not written, but they do get married on March 15th of this year. So really, really great. Also, Jamie, I was excited because Bob was mentioned a number of times in this letter, her brother Bob that's serving. And I remember a number of episodes ago, I was really hoping we'd get to see a picture of Bob in uniform now, because a ton of photos have surfaced. We were going through, and we have seen that Frank was in the Army, Bob was in the Navy, and a photo has surfaced of Bob in uniform, and it is absolutely spectacular. I mean, if we're gonna get a photo of this, I was so happy if I have one photo that this is the photo we have, so I can share this with you now. I don't think I've shown this to you before. Yeah.
Oh,
It's really exceptional. And this is the naval uniform.
Oh, he looks so sharp.
You can see on his hat the eagle with the anchors, so we know it's the Navy. And just compared to his other photos, we know that this is Bob in uniform. And I think she was mentioning she wanted to show pictures of Bob and Florence to people at Ottumwa. So the woman to Bob's left, I'm sorry, to his right, to our left when we're looking at the photo, that's Florence, from what we can tell. And then Sweetie is on Bob's left, our right, on the extreme right of the photo. Now, I'm still trying to identify the third woman in the photo on the left side of the photo. I think Florence had a sister. If that's the case, I would suspect that's probably Florence's sister, because we know it's not Margaret and we know it's not Jean. Tell who it isn't. So if it is a family picture, then it's potentially, I think Florence had a sister. So I'm going to double check that and try to, do some sleuthing to work out the woman on the left. But this is certainly Bob. So for this
is a lovely picture. And it's such a beautiful picture of Sweetie too.
Yeah.
It's really lovely to kind of recognize her in these photos, but he's got a little, he looks so sharp.
He looks so sharp.
It's like such a lovely picture.
Yeah, she wanted to show off her brother Bob. And if you get a photo like this, I can see he's a good looking guy. Like, this is a great way to show off your new sister-in-law and your brother, who's serving in the Navy.
You can see the family resemblance.
Yeah,
you can see they have that Demery,
like you can tell. Look. Yeah,
that Demery look. This is very lovely.
Yeah. So
you just found these, and these were just discovered.
These were just discovered. Yeah. What was happening was, and I mentioned this in the previous episode, is we knew we have some photos going back to these time periods, but there were these accordion files that were dated the 70s that were put aside. And we shouldn't have just trusted that it only had the 70s inside. And inside was this massive collection. I mean, I'm processing them right now. And actually, I've been posting on our channel on YouTube some small videos about just, photos as they're being processed, especially ones prior to 1940. They're going to be the first one processed in. And I'm trying to identify and sleuth through basically the whole thing to figure out who everybody is. But we were just going through for hours, my father and I, and up came this photo, and I could tell immediately this is from the 40s. We said this is a naval uniform, and then we held up another photo of Bob, and it was just very clear that this is Bob in uniform. Cool. And I was so relieved that this survived, that we get to see this. And
this is lovely.
Photo. Yeah,
it's a beautiful photo. I want to know what the lip color is, and I would like to know, because that looks really nice.
Oh, I mean, I know they're definitely wearing something. Yeah.
Oh, they all are. Well, not him, not Bob, but yeah. Yeah. But it's a really great photo. It's exciting for me because I know that we're going to see some more stuff that that we weren't expecting. So this is nice.
Yeah, to have this and for this to survive. This is one of, I think, I would say, of all the photos that I looked at in the hundreds of photos, this might be one of the most important to come across, at least from the 40s. It's nice to see the Parsons College ones we were looking at last week. But this one, just to have Bob in uniform with Florence is fantastic.
But we have one more
short letter here.
Short little letter.
Yep. So we'll play this today. From April. Ottumwa, Iowa, April 5th, 1943. Dear Jean, I've been going to write before, but darn, something always happens. Now my pen's dry, so I'll have to write with pencil if I'm going to write. I heard from Mom today. She sent me Frank's address, so I used the last of my ink on him. She gave me his address, but I'm awfully afraid it's incomplete. I can just hope it's right. She said he might be there for weeks, and I wonder if Maida won't join him. I suppose they'll keep him on hot rocks about when he's to sail, just so she can't come to him. What do you think? The letter I got from her didn't sound as though she were particularly happy, but she's planning on going back to work. I'll have to write to her some. Both Mom and Pop got Bob's sore throat. Annie is still with them, and Daddy is pleased to think she's enjoying herself. About this cadet, if he's a good dancer, do have him look me up. I'd so like to go to a dance that if he can dance, I'll not even look at his face. I'll be nice to him. I'm even getting tired of embroidering. I've been sitting so long doing nothing but what I've already said I'm tired of doing. When is he coming? Yeah, who knows who the cadet is, but I just love this phrase of, I just want to go dance, so I don't care about, I won't even look at his face. Let's just go dance. Send me this, and I'll be nice. I'll be nice to him. Because, in the previous letter, we had this thing about George. She's like, I don't know, he's not talking to me. It's like, I'll be nice. I won't even look at him. Like, let's just go out and dance.
She's bored.
She's bored. Yeah, she's been embroidering a bit too long and sitting at home.
And when she's been writing so much that her pen's gone dry.
Yeah, she ran out of her ink. So now she's writing in pencil. Marie Kilpatrick, Lois Baumgartner, Lucille are all coming here to spend the weekend. I hope it's fun. Marie has wanted to come for so long. I do want them to come, and I'm doing my spring house cleaning this week after work, washing window curtains, woodworks, floors, etc. It will have to shine, and I do mean but definitely. I've had 4 cablegrams and 5 letters from David, but I'm awfully disappointed that he hasn't tried to tell me more about China. I realize he'd have a hard time getting much by the censor, but darn him, he hasn't even tried to get anything by them. I shouldn't worry as long as I hear from him at all, but doggone it, sometimes he just doesn't use his head. Yeah, send me some military secrets. Okay, David, what are you doing? And also, I guess he's in China. This is the implication from here, which is interesting because the idea from the earlier letters was he was on the East Coast, and then she was concerned about the ships that went down on the Atlantic. So I was thinking, okay, he's going to go to the European theater or to North Africa. And now, by April, she's saying, why aren't you telling me more about China? Implying that he's over there and he's not trying to get anything through the censor. Like, at least give us something,
It is kind of funny. And I do like that she's like a little bit more involved with herself than with David, because she's like, hey, I want to know about China. Like, I know you're in a war and you're like
come on,
so far away from home and stuff, but I'm bored.
Yeah, I have these 9 communications from you, and you're not even trying to sneak anything by the censor.
I wonder if he's like, oh, it'd be so great if we could get married and have babies when I come back, or what, because he's not talking about what he's doing.
Nope. I had another surprise today. Hilda Stevenson called me at the base and talked to me for quite a while and gave me Steve's address, and I promised I'd write to him. She says she's pretty sure he's in New Zealand. Bernadine hasn't been home since she went to Wichita, Kansas before I started to work, so I'm writing to him tonight. Did you see where Marjorie is married? Ho-hum. I guess I'll just die an old maid. I'm afraid. Well, it's after 10. I'll have more work to do tomorrow than I can possibly get done, so now I'll go to bed. I've got to write to the folks, Margaret and Maida, tomorrow. Have you heard from your Bob friend? I hope. It takes Dave's letters about 2 weeks to get here. They come in batches of 2 or 3, and not very often. Love, sweetie. Right. Send the cadet around. And the guy. I'm gonna die an old maid.
Yeah, she's 20.
She's 20.
I'm gonna die.
How dramatic.
Nobody. Everybody else is getting married. It's not like she doesn't have options.
Yeah. She's at a base surrounded by all these Navy guys. She's going to dances. She's hoping to get to a dance with any pair.
She's having her sister set up people
with dance with her. So, yeah.
But too, it's funny because it seems like the only options she does have are people who are in the military. Like, she's not like like romancing the baker or seeing people down. Like that's where she's looking for a man.
Yep,
she's
looking around her base. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens. It's just interesting that we see so much about David Chase just coming back at this moment. So,
well, she like found out that she might have lost him.
Yeah.
And then she's like all in.
Yep. So, keeping up a big correspondence with him. So, we'll see where that goes. But with
Yes.
that concludes our episode for today. We've gotten through all 4 letters. We've progressed a little bit into the spring of 1943. Jean's about to graduate from nursing school, which is really exciting. And we got to see that lovely photo, of course. And, of course, hearing about Frank and Maida.
Frank and Maida are married.
Yep.
Yes.
In March.
Her parents are doing well.
Yep.
I mean, it seems very busy.
Mm-hmm. And David did survive, at least, and made it all the way to China. So what he's doing in China in the military, unclear. He's not telling anybody, including Sweetie, because nothing's getting by the censor. He doesn't seem to be attempting to get anything by the censor. So we'll pick up there next week. For everybody listening, thank you so much for your time spent listening to this podcast on the various channels. If you're on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. Please check out our website at www.lovesweetiepodcast.com. We're also streaming the audio-only version of this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Podchaser. So you can find us on all of those channels. Leave a review if you're listening over there. It really helps us. Outside of that, just look for some more content appearing here and there, little shorts, little clips, some of it about that photograph collection that's being worked with, in addition to some of the content here. But other than that, thank you for your time, and we look forward to going into episode 12 next week with you all.
Next Sunday. See you next week.
Bye, everyone.